Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I'm one of your hosts, Brian Taylor Marshall, with Cammy. Hey, Cammy.
Hi, Brian.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not too bad so far as our world crumbles around us.
Yeah, it's getting bad out there.
So this podcast goes in every week. We talk about a random story, history, myth, legend, what have you, and we will try and give you a nice tale, and then we'll jump into the history behind it. And we had, it's a funny how we got to today's topic. We wanted, if you've listened to the show, you know that I love Byzantium, and there's the famous, Cammy had a great idea, the famous Justinian plague, which was one of the first major outbreak of the bubonic plague. And while she started doing some research on that, you came across this other story. Can you just give us a little blimp, just so I don't steal it?
No, I don't want to go too far into it, but it is the story of the plague town of Eyam.
Yes.
England.
Yes. So this was during another, not really one of the major outbreaks, but yeah, we're talking about the bubonic plague, specifically how it affected this little English town in the north of England.
We do have a couple of ghost stories associated with this, so it's very interesting.
Right. So, and there's an irony we realized once we were starting getting closer to recording this episode of the COVID-19 coronavirus situation as it consumes our lives. So I don't know if it's cheesy that we're doing this at this time, if it's appropriate, not like that it's inappropriate. This wasn't inspired by that. It was just sort of where we came to. It was very timely, yeah. So we hope that it just kind of gives you an interesting story, and I hope that this isn't too subject
on the
of
nose.
Yeah. So anyway, Cammy, tell us what you got.
So in 1666, the village of Eyam, England, received a bundle of cloth from London. A local tailor had ordered the cloth so he could make clothes for a religious festival. The bundle arrived damp, so the tailor hung it up in his house to dry. Little did he know it was covered in fleas. And during this time in London, there was a plague outbreak, and it was specifically the bubonic plague, which is carried by fleas. So George Vickers, who was the tailor's assistant, was the first to fall ill, and he died shortly after feeling sick. The plague would end up claiming 260 people in this small village of somewhere between 350 to 800 people. Some villagers decided to flee for their lives, but William Montpesson, the rector, called on an exiled Reverend, Thomas Stanley, for help. On June 24th, 1666, Montpesson called a town meeting, and he and Stanley convinced the villagers to remain in their town to prevent the spread of the disease. The entire village decided to make a vow of sacrifice. No one left. From a nearby hill, the people from neighboring villages watched in horror as entire families buried their own. One woman buried her husband and 6 children.
In the course of 7 days.
Was it 7 days?
Yeah, 7 or 8 days, yeah.
So a trading system had to be established, and food was brought to the town. It was it was brought to some stone or something that they, like a meeting place. And the food and other supplies were left. The villagers would leave coins that they had disinfected in vinegar as payment. So they knew enough about disease at that time to know that vinegar would disinfect it. In November of 1666, the plague claimed its last victim, Abraham Morton. The sacrifice these people made meant the neighboring villages never had to contend with the virus. Their efforts had succeeded, even though the ones who sacrificed the most would never know that their plans had worked.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I've got a couple of ghost stories surrounding this village.
That's great.
Because it was severely affected by the Black Plague, and like I said, it was somewhere between a third to 2/3 of the people, depending on, which source is correct on that. They didn't have accurate census data, I guess, at the time, but they had been wiped out. So the Miners' Arms, it's a pub now, but it's also like a sort of bed and breakfast type of thing.
Okay.
There are footsteps that are commonly heard with no one to attribute them to. Many guests have decided to leave before their stay was up because things like doors would open and close by themselves and stuff like that. There was also a fire that claimed 2 girls, and this was later. This was when it was actually the Miners' Arms, because before it was something else. Or it might have been where the plague people were buried or something. But 2 teenagers died in the fire. Their names were Sarah and Emma, and they can be heard late at night calling to each other by name. Eyam Hall also boasts some strange occurrences that are related to, I mean, who knows what really, but they attribute them to, like, plague victims. Footsteps and stuff like that are heard there too. But the spirit of Sarah Mills, who was drowned in the village well, part of that. Yeah. At one point, the ghostly activity was so bad in one location, the current villagers actually went looking for the curse. Like, they assumed that, you know, there was something causing all the disruption. And they found a bundle that was buried that was wrapped in cloth. And fearing that it was related to the plague, they actually burned it, and then the activity stopped. So
fairies.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of
wow.
what I have. Yeah,
that's really great.
Just it's just, to me, it's so touching the sacrifice that these people made. I mean, they knew they were going to die.
That's an awareness.
Yes.
That's like a really astute awareness here. Except for 1666. I mean, that's past the 2 major outbreaks of the bubonic plague.
This was the, I guess, London outbreak.
Yeah, and that's, you know, looking into the bubonic plague, it never goes away. It just doesn't murder everybody. That's kind of how it goes. Justinian's was the big one in 600, and then 1300 was the Black Death. And I feel like I mean, there was even a 3rd wave of the bubonic plague in 1894. It never reached the numbers that it reached today, but it, like, the World Health Organization kind of says that it didn't end really until the 50s because the death counts.
Where was that?
That in China it started.
Oh, okay.
But it even came to, you know, there was a huge Chinese migrant population in California, and it spread there and actually spread through America for a little while.
I guess, like, ships with rats that have fleas on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And even passengers. I mean, the migrant community was huge because of the workers that were needed, and America's crazy policies against Chinese immigrants were terrible and kept a lot of people out, but probably subdued the rate the plague was able to move. But either way, it was big. I mean, it wasn't until the 50s until the like I said, the World Health Organization was able to kind of be like, all right, not enough people are dying daily for us to say that it's really a pandemic. But for this country, or this village, like I said, it's a very small village. Its population today, in the 2011 census was 969. So, and you're right, it was refuted. Some sources say they had as many as 800 people during that time, with 400 survivors, or 83 out of 350. So, kind of either way, I mean, it's always been a very small village. I mean, if you can think in your mind, tiny, cozy English village, like the one from Hot Fuzz is a great idea.
Right. Yeah.
This is that village. It's very tiny. It's very small, and so it wasn't like where it is on a map. I don't think it was like a super essential stop for anyone, but it was definitely a part of the community of England still. So for it to knowingly go through that was a huge deal. And yeah, I did come across that too. A woman it was 8 days. There's this Eyam's website discusses it.
You're talking about the woman that had to bury her family?
That's right, okay. Yeah, who survived. So eyamvillage.org.uk, it's a really nice little website. It's well made that you can look at, and it's like it's a mini tourist attraction. But it discusses how there's this weird... so the way it puts it is also known that some of the village population were genetically unique and naturally immune to this very deadly disease. There are still descendants of this line in Eyam. So I thought that was cool that there's still people around that were in there in 1666. But yeah, there's this weird idea of immunity. And now, so I did a brief kind of look at the bubonic plague that I've mentioned on. It never really talked about immunity.
Okay, so the William Mompesson?
Yeah.
He was an outsider of the village to begin with, and he kind of got caught up in the whole thing.
Sure.
But he thought that he was immune because he had actually had the plague before.
Oh. So they had
style. Yeah, they had some idea of,
awareness, yeah.
Immunity.
We discussed recently on our episode with Peter that went up last week on the Mermaids episode, the miasma theory, which was popular since ancient Greek times,
Right.
and was very prominent in many medical societies for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. And that's that there are waves of air that carry the wind carries these diseases. And so the way that they kind of thought about they were transferred was way different. Now the bubonic plague, I'll go into it. So it is the fleas carry it through blood, in the bites. If you get bitten directly by the fleas, that's one way you can get it. Or if you're in contact with an animal, dead or alive, or human dead or alive, and the fluids from them, that's another way you can get it, is from those bacteria.
So
those
it's
bacteria
bodily
spawning.
fluids?
Yeah, and even it's still around today, and animals getting it is the number one way that it'll transfer to humans. So, and it's messy. Now it's funny too. If in case you're wondering, bubon is an old Greek word which means like groin or abdomen, and that's where one of the lymph nodes that swells is. And so it might have, I don't know if it was through Justinian's time. I mean, they were speaking Greek then. But yeah, bubonic, that's where that kind of comes from. And a bubo is one of the swollen lymph nodes is referred as. Yeah, either way, in Eyam, there was a handful of people, at least a quarter of the population was able to survive. And it's really weird. And this woman, 7 of her family members was in contact with, getting bitten by fleas. I mean, dealing with them. And that's, so Eyam had, aside from their like self-quarantining and sort of shutting them out from the greater community, their leaders, so they had like they call him a rector, I believe it was basically like a religious leader. They implemented a few other precautions. Families digging their own graves was a big thing, and there's some memorials and the grave sites that you can still see today. You treat the bubonic plague with antibiotics now. But it's interesting. I mean, Justinian was able to survive the plague, his plague, through extensive treatment is all it kind of says. I didn't really go too into it. We might ourselves. But it's really interesting. And also the village had an unofficial grave digger, Marshal Howe, and he also survived, and he also handled many infected bodies. It's weird. I don't know what explains it, that they were able to not get completely wiped out.
Well, any disease is going to have people that are naturally immune to it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that bacteria. And it's funny. I mean, like I said, it's still around today. I as soon as we started looking into it, I remember last May a couple was in Mongolia and died of it when they were hunting. So it's mainly apparent in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo. Even Peru had a few cases. Or those are the countries with the highest death, the developing countries that don't have the infrastructure like that we do today, the modern infrastructure and antibiotics readily available. Yeah, I mean, but this is, the bubonic plague is, there was a cool link to the Black Death. I mean, the Black Death killed, I think, 50 million or something like that? An insane number.
Yeah, I think it was, was that the Spanish flu?
Probably both. But it's interesting. One thing I saw was that after these plagues, the economies would heavily change because labor became important again. It gave you a better wage, and it made work more. Yeah, if you think about it, because you have less workforce, less of a pool. I mean, if you got to build a building and you just need some dudes to run around with some wood, you don't have that accessible pool anymore. So it's interesting that what economic effects that these plagues have. And it's insane how they travel too. Like, I mean, I mentioned what the third outbreak, it's also called the modern outbreak, came from China and ended up hitting America in some cases. But Justinian's plague was linked to Mongolians, or in that era, who attacked Italian merchants, and then it went from there. So yeah, I mean, it's so little, and that was a massive blow to several countries in the Mediterranean, and then it went all through Europe as well. I mean, it starts in Mongolia. These Italian dudes get it. They give it to everyone in the Mediterranean. And then from there, it goes through France, Germany. Someone goes to England. Done.
It reminds me a little bit when we were speaking about the Sphinx, I believe.
Yeah.
And you were talking about all the things that were brought back from Byzantium to the rest of Europe.
Yeah, the Renaissance ushering after Constantinople. Right. Yeah.
I mean, it almost follows a similar path in that way.
Yeah, it has humanity, the good and the bad, right, as humanity spreads back to what it wants to see as comfortable. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. This is wild. But yeah, Eyam's still here today. 900 people. I've heard it mentioned. Yeah, it was like a simple Anglo-Saxon city. It wasn't anything in particularly special. It doesn't really have. I mean, it's a really pretty city. I recommend going to this website. But it's a very like just a simple city or village, and it's absolutely wild.
They did a remarkable thing.
It really did. Again, just to tie it back into today, which I'm sure, like I said, I'm just tired about hearing it. Our this USC here, it quickly decided to like shut down, give us an extra week of spring break, and then do online classes for at least 2 weeks. And there's rumors that some of the public schools will follow, like elementary level and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I remember there was a senator, I can't remember his name, who was chastising it, like, come on, it's chill out, like, and he was trying to say that you don't have to panic, you can take care of things, and he was saying that it was a panic, but it's like, if we lock it down,
right? Let's get on this now.
You can lock it down, and it's okay. It's okay to do that, and I mean, this is a case study of locking it down in a wild way.
Well, I mean, it works.
Yeah.
I do want to go over a couple of my sources.
Yeah, please.
Too.
Yeah, you got some really good ones.
Yeah, BBC.com, Eyam Plague, The Village of the Damned. And I also, for the ghost stories, unexplainedmysteries.com, and it was someone called Sam. It's like...
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
Appreciate it.
It's not the other Sam that we called out a few episodes ago. But yeah, this one, it was just like a forum, and this person posted like a lot of information about that. And then there's hauntedrooms.co.uk and then haunted-britain.com.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, everyone, as Cammy and I break the protocol of social distancing in order to bring you this podcast, we hope that you're enjoying it. Let us know on our Facebook page, Mythstorie. Remember, that's Mythstorie with an IE at the end. Or you can email us directly at Gmail as well, mythstorie@gmail.com. But let us know what you think, and we will see you guys next time.